The biggest need of the Cincinnati Reds this offseason is clear. And the television voice of the Reds agrees with us.
You are Locked On Reds, your daily Cincinnati Reds podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Reds. My name is Jeff Carr. I am one of the two hosts of this show. Steve Offenbaker will be along shortly, as Steve got to sit down with Bally Sports play-by-play broadcaster for your Cincinnati Reds, John Sadak, and got the chance to talk about the 2024 season, a little bit of a postmortem, looking forward to the offseason and what the Reds need to do now that they have their new manager, Terry Francona, being introduced in a press conference here earlier here on Monday morning. Depending on when you listen to this, might have already happened, and we'll have an episode covering that. Once that meeting happens, we will cover that. But we had a great chat with John Sadak and really got into a lot of great stuff. He talked about Pete Rose and a few memories of him that he had, and why his records really will never be broken unless rule changes happen. We're also going to get a little bit into the weeds on the Bally Sports thing. He gives us a few of the details that he knows, although he is as much in the dark as we are, as he will tell us in just a few minutes. He will also talk about Elly De La Cruz, why we've only begun to scratch the surface on just how good he can be. But John has some thoughts on whether or not he will move away from shortstop anytime soon. We will begin the show, though, with the offseason and what the Reds need to do now that they have their manager in-house. What's next? That's clear. Something we've actually been telling you. John Sadak agrees with us, too. He's going to tell you why. He's going to go into detail, though, as to how the Reds can go about acquiring said offseason need. Before we do that, I wanted to let you know that this episode of Locked On Reds is brought to you by Booking.com. Yeah, the right stay can make you a fan of any city, even your baseball rivals. Book today on Booking.com, the official accommodation partner of Major League Baseball. Get the Booking.com app today. All right.
If you could only pick one area this offseason, one upgrade, one go and get for the Reds, and I'm talking about position players, what do the Reds need to go get?
Corner outfielder that can hit for power.
Yes, sir.
And that could be a flawed. he can be a lower average and higher strikeout guy. That's probably, when you weigh the guys who can hit for high average and not strike out and play corner outfield and hit homers are on giant multi-year deals already with teams. They don't exist. They're not available. You'd have to trade a lot to get one player like that, probably more than is worth it. But a corner outfielder that can hit for power. If he hits, well, the first guy that kind of springs to mind as an equivalency is, when the Reds went and got Hunter Renfroe, who did not play very well for the Reds, had a very poor run as a Red. But you look at his career numbers, and he's a guy that, the power should spike even a little bit more at Great American Ballpark. He hits for a lower average. He does strike out. But a guy like that, who, if he played every home game at GABP and was healthy for most of the year, played 145, 150 games, should probably hit 35 to 40 homers. They need a power threat like that. Yeah, that's where the lack of productivity for the first month and then season-ending injury for Christian Encarnacion Strand was a huge deal. Because I think many of us thought that he was going to be that 30 to 40 home run guy that could kind of be, the thumper in the middle of the lineup.
Yeah, I answered that question when Jeff and I talked about it the same way you did. And I have honed in on Santander as the guy that I would love for the Reds to go spend a bunch of money on. Don't know if it'll happen, but that's kind of the guy I looked at and thought, Juan Soto's not going to happen. So who would I want? And that's where I landed, was on Santander.
I think he will be, fairly prohibitively expensive. And I think there will be, even within the division, like I would imagine, although the rhetoric that's been coming out is that they're going to keep a lot of things similar, cut down on money. Like the Cardinals are the kind of team that I would think fit with him very well. But I agree with you. The Orioles are a team that has failed in the playoffs, but has won in the regular season a lot during his run. And I do think he is exactly the kind of fit, the kind of player that could also bring in some leadership too. I think this team could benefit from that. Someone who has won a bit and who can kind of be that, even more than just example, hopefully. And I don't know if he is that guy or not. That's where other research has to come in. Somebody who can be a little verbal with this team, I think would help.
Let's talk about pitching just a little bit in the little bit of time I got left. And thanks for hanging out for so long, John. You touched on the pitching staff just a little bit back there, and I want to circle back to it. Do the Reds need to go get a major league experienced fifth starter type guy for this rotation? Or do you think there's enough in-house, assuming everybody comes back healthy in good year? Is there enough here already given what's available in big league and minor leagues, or should they be looking for a guy?
I think you can never have too much pitching. So it really depends upon who that dude is. Nick Martinez was a tremendous add for this team, especially over the second half plus of the year. Maybe the greatest month plus run of his life happened as a Red when he was reinserted into that, second wind rotation when everybody got hurt. And that's part of the concern is that, none of these young, talented pitchers, and they're super talented and they have high-end ability, have made it through a full year. They've all missed chunks of time or have been non-productive during some of that time. You would hope and think that they're going to find ways in their offseason to condition themselves in a way, and maybe just the innings experience of being in the big leagues and whatever can be done to help manage things in the best way to get them through full years in greater volume is a big deal. But that said, it kind of is what it is. And one of the truisms that I have found in most of the time that I have covered sport, even beyond baseball, is that if there are gaps where there has been either injury issue or something else for a player that has impacted ability, that usually doesn't go away, particularly as players get older. It usually is just kind of there. And it doesn't mean they're soft. It doesn't mean that they're not tough. Just the way that people's bodies are built. That's just the way it is. So yes, I do think there can be value in that. And I do think you're always learning and always trying to get better. So if you can find the right guy that, even if it's 100 or 150 innings that you get out of the person, but they bring another, veteran leadership, new ideas. While Frankie Montas did not pitch very well as a Red overall, with some limited exceptions, I do think some of the success of these younger starters can be attributed to the conversations he had with them, particularly the big step that Hunter Green took, that I think Hunter, first and foremost, deserves credit for. He's the one who put in a lot of that work. He drove his offseason. But, yeah, I do think Frankie helped him. And could someone else help Hunter, help Andrew Abbott, help Nick Lodolo, help Graham Ashcraft, help whoever else? What if it is Chase Burns? What if it is Connor Phillips? What if it is Lyon Richardson? I don't know. Any one of those guys can and probably will be up at some point during the year. I don't think it's a pressing need in the same way that they really could use a bat that can drive in runs. But it would be nice to have, sure.
I couldn't agree more with John's points. I think later on this week, we will kind of dive into some of his thoughts. I don't necessarily think that he believes the Reds are going to go after a guy like Anthony Santander. And I got some thoughts on that, but we'll talk about that later on in the week. But now, John and Steve will kind of shift the conversation to the guys on the roster, a couple of important players like Elly De La Cruz, why he doesn't necessarily think Elly's going to move to third base, and why we may have been too hard on Spencer Steer. Plus, is Graham Ashcraft moving to the bullpen? That's all coming up next. Do you like collecting sports cards? I do, and I found a great way to enjoy my hobby. It's called Arena Club. They've got these things called slab packs. They are rare cards, autographed cards, and some graded cards and things like that that are already in those protective slabs that a graded card comes in. And you get to collect this all digitally on the Arena Club website. You purchase a slab pack. You can pick your favorite sport, whether it be baseball, football, basketball. They even have Pokemon cards there as well. All of them graded, all of them legitimate, and you get them digitally. If you want to trade them, you can trade them all digitally. You can sell them to their marketplace, all this great stuff. But if you get that card that you love, you can bring it home for a small shipping fee. Right now, you can get 10% off your first slab pack over at Arena Club or your first card purchase by going to arenaclub.com/LockedOnMLB and just use the code LockedOnMLB there at that website. Again, that's arenaclub.com/LockedOnMLB with the code LockedOnMLB for 10% off your first purchase.
All right, let's talk about this team and some of the players on it. We'll start with the position players. You talked about Elly there a little bit, and I agree with everything you said. I'm not expecting him to cut his strikeouts down to 100 or less, but 150, 160, I think that's the sweet spot. I completely agree with you on that. For me, looking at Elly, I think we've still only just scratched the surface. I think that as he gets more and more playing time, more and more at bats, he's just going to continue to get better. Looking at this team and looking at Elly specifically, there's an interesting scenario developing where Jonathan India, for the first time in his career, played second base with a positive outs above average. He looked a lot better defensively in the field this year. With Matt McLain coming back, do you see a scenario, and also factoring in the struggles of Noelvi Marte, do you see a scenario where the infield, you know, going around the horn looks like Elly at third with McLain at short and India at second base?
I think anything is possible. I know Elly loves playing shortstop and wants to stay at shortstop. Now, they did exactly what you're describing a couple of years ago in 2023. They played that way. And could that happen at some stretch? Maybe. I also think it's very hopefully possible in the relatively near future, depending upon how Edwin Arroyo rebounds. Does he fight his way to get onto the big league team where he profiles best at shortstop? And McLain's missed a lot of time, man, like a lot. He's a great player. I thought he was the Reds' best player in 2023, but sophomore slumps can be real, period. And he's going to go into essentially a sophomore season, his first full major league season, having not played at all in a little over a calendar year. That's part of why he was so driven to coming back before this past season ended. We saw him a couple of times on the road. The Reds had him join the team and do some light activity, be around the guys. When he was in Atlanta, I spoke to him for a little bit, and he said at that time, because we didn't know what the Reds playoff picture would look like, he's like, I want to come back no matter what. I don't care if the team is in it or not. Of course, I want the team to be in it. Of course, I want to contribute to a playoff run, but I haven't played. I haven't been on the field in this time. I need to just get out there and play. There's a lot to that. I don't know that we can ink anything. I mean, we won't know anything about any of these guys until spring training arrives. I think spring training is a huge deal. Normally, and Chris Welsh is a guy who says this, and Steve Luber, who's a pitching coach I've worked with forever, and A-Ball always said this, and I agree with them. If you have a veteran core team, spring training should hold very little weight. If you have backup baseball card material and a veteran proven player has a bad spring, who cares? That guy's going to play. The Reds don't have that. There aren't many guys that have played all that much that really have a back of the baseball card. I think spring training matters a lot at a number of positions. And I think these players know that. And hopefully that's what they're building a lot of their offseason toward. And internal competition is great. It's something Barry Larkin talks about all the time, particularly with the 90 Reds team. That sense of driving each other in almost every single way, I think is great. And that's what I hope to see. I think we're going to see that fighting for those rotation spots too.
You made mention of sophomore slumps, and I want to talk about Spencer Steer for just a minute. His season, it's really hard to label his season. It's really, it was fine. I mean, it could have been better. It wasn't what I expected from him. I wasn't a bust of a season. In my opinion, if I ask you to describe Spencer Steer's 2024, how do you describe it?
I think it was a good year. He played a number of positions. He was a major run producer. He hit for a high amount of extra base hits, doubles, and homers, and for steals. He had a low average. It wasn't an abhorrent average, and I think part of it that we have to condition all of us ourselves to is that major league average is what, 243, and what did he finish at, 230? So he wasn't crazy below that number. That number for me, I still reflexively kick back to my youth and what 230 would have meant 20 years ago, but it doesn't mean that anymore. And I also think that he is probably best as more of a complementary bat. When he was hitting at his best, he and Tyler Stevenson both were hitting more in the 5, 6, 7 range most of the time. Lineup position can be overrated, but this team, the bottom third of the lineup, many days over the course of the year, was not very good. It wasn't super productive, and that meant lower average and high strikeouts and not a lot of run production, which meant a lot more pressure on him as the depth of the team was tested. I think a lot of players throughout the year play with a lot of things that they have to grind through. I have no doubt in Spencer Steer. I fully believe in that young man's ability. I think his versatility in almost every way, his combination of power and speed, the ability to play multiple positions, the ability to just kind of go with the flow, and the ability to, when there are guys on base, knock them in. I think that's a skill. I really do. And I think he is a talented player in that regard. And I know he wants that average to be higher. Of course he does. He wants everything to be better. He wants to take big strides. He wants to be a highly productive player for this team. But yeah, the average was notably down a bit. And then over the last month, you saw that the average cratered and the strikeouts went up. But I don't know exactly what he was playing with during that time. And I think there's a lot of guys that play through a lot at that stage of the year.
Let's talk about Graham Ashcraft for just a second. Very, very off and on for the last 2 years, and some of it was explainable, some of it injury related. But I wonder, is there a shifting view on him that he's going to be better suited to be a bullpen guy? And could he be I think anyway, he could be a pretty good back of the bullpen type of guy if he came in and pitched maximum effort for 3-4 batters in an outing.
Yeah, you're not the only one. I mean, there are others who have talked about that too. To some extent, you need buy-in from the player as well. You need to see what you have. I mean, a good starter to me is always going to have more value than outside of Rivera, who is untouchable in the ninth inning.
Right.
So you don't want to eliminate that route until you're almost pressed into it, until you have to. That said, yeah, maybe. I think it's a fair conversation. I'm sure it's something that's being thought about. Will it actually happen? I don't know. I mean, it comes down to, what is his health? What do they view internally as the reasons for the inconsistency that he's had to this point? How much of it is correctable? What work has he already done or is he even able to do? I really don't know. At this point in his offseason or at any point along during the offseason that they can evaluate that. I can't imagine that they would. Well, I really don't know. It would surprise me if they made a steadfast decision before pitchers were there in Arizona and they had eyes on everybody and could kind of assess where they're at. But could it happen? Yeah. I mean, and you're not the only person to think that. I mean, I think his mentality really fits that end of game. I mean, and it's part of what I love watching him start. He has that aggressive bulldog kind of attitude. I mean, and his stuff, when his stuff plays at its best, when he's the best version of himself, I see a lot of Emmanuel Clase with Cleveland. I mean, very, similar idea to how they attack guys. And but that said, if he also, when he first came up, he was a guy that would go 6-7 innings regularly. That did not impact him at all, and his velo would stay the same. And that's when he was more of a sinker ground ball guy. I'm not sure. I really don't know, but I think it's a fair talking point that I do think is worthy of conversation.
Pete Rose set some records that will never be broken. I think most of us Reds fans agree with that statement, but John's going to go a little bit more into detail as to just how hard it would be to break these records. That is coming up next. This episode of Locked On Reds is brought to you by Booking.com. Booking.yeah. When you're coming up on a big trip and maybe you're looking for that perfect place to stay, Booking.com is the way to go. I used this whenever I went down to Atlanta. Helped us find a great place that was close to the stadium, had a nice view, had a pool, was next to some good restaurants. It's pretty easy to do whenever you're up there by Truist Park, but Booking.com helped us find the right place with the right price. Booking.com is so easy to use. All you have to do is type in your destination, maybe even type in a specific thing that you want to see in that city. I don't know, if you're going down to Florida, you want to go to Disney World or something like that. You type that in. Booking.com is going to come up with all of the best places you can stay. Hotels, resorts, beds and breakfast, all that kind of stuff can be found on Booking.com. Check out the website today, or they've got a great app as well, Booking.com on the App Store. It makes it super easy to book, super easy to find your next place to go, and you might even find that you'll love where you're going, even if it's your rival city. Again, that's Booking.com on the website or on the Booking.com app today. And hey, whether you're an NFL fan, whether you're a baseball fan that's in playoff mode, if you're like us, Reds fans, we're just kind of watching the playoffs, enjoying some other teams playing baseball for a change, you can get in on the action over at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. They've got all kinds of great lines on playoff games, prop bets as well. Take somebody to hit a home run. I mean, if you take Shohei Ohtani to hit a home run, you're probably looking pretty good. Or maybe look at the Mets and Phillies series and look at Mark Vientos to hit a home run for the Mets, or Nick Castellanos to come up with a big RBI like he did in Game 2. FanDuel is the place to take advantage of all that. Plus, right now, they've got a great offer going on because you can get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. So you just download the FanDuel app, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDON, and you get the $200 guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com.
The news of really the day and the week here, and that is Bally Sports saying they're going to drop all of their Major League Baseball coverage except for the Atlanta Braves. I imagine there's not a whole lot you can say about it, but do you know anything that you can share with us, or how you're doing, how you're feeling right now with the news?
All I know is what everybody else knows. I mean, literally, we're told nothing. I learn as I read in trades. The one correction, I think, is that Evan with The Athletic is the one who first broke a story, but then he retracted elements of the original story, and then there's like asterisks to everything. And I kind of feel like that's what this whole situation is. It's one big asterisk. It's kind of a big wait and see. The Reds aren't by their lonesome in that regard. It's really unpredictable. I mean, with the erosion of the traditional cable, structure that kind of fueled sport, particularly in Major League Baseball, NBA, and the NHL. I really have no idea. As far as I know, everything that I'm told by the team is that they like me and they want me to call the games on TV. So however that happens, whatever that means, my belief, to my knowledge, is that I'll be calling games.
All right, listen, we don't like you. We love you, John Sadak. And whoever's listening, powers that be, keep this man on the air. All right, John, thanks for covering that with us. I want to move into the other news of the week, sad, somber news. That is the passing of Peter Edward Rose, a complicated man with a complicated relationship with the city and the sport. Jeff and I have chosen to focus on the baseball, and I'm going to do that with you as well. This is a guy that I think, if you were to go to a dictionary and look up hard-nosed baseball player, if you were to just look up baseball player, you're going to find a picture of Pete Rose there.
Yeah, I mean, Charlie Hustle. It's a man who was an all-star at 5 different positions, who just, by all the accounts of his teammates, wanted it more. I think it's to a heavy extent, there's an excessive poo-pooing of his abilities, which were significant. But that will is what stands out the most. It's why his statue is one of the more unique statues in all of sports. Catching him in action, head first plunging into a bag. Who collided with Ray Fosse at home plate in an All-Star game to try to win. I mean, that was the will to play and to win that he represented. I only had a chance to meet him a handful of times. The longest interaction I had with him was before my Reds time. So at AAA, I covered games for Scranton Wilkes-Barre, which over its history was both Phillies and Yankees. And several off seasons, they would have joint baseball hot stove events with significant players from both franchises. And because of Pete's time with the Phillies, there was one year, it was Chris Chambliss, it was Larry Boa, and Pete Rose were all at this event. And it was Pete Rose who was holding court. It was Pete Rose who was telling stories. It was Pete Rose that everybody wanted to have long engagement with. And his love and his passion for the sport, for the city, for the franchise is second to none.
That narrative that Pete wasn't as talented as everybody else. I've been guilty of bringing that forward. Jeff and I have talked about it a couple times. He was tremendously talented. Do you think that narrative comes from, his hamming it up, yucking it up, kind of grit and hard-nosed blue collar kind of presentation of himself? Where do you think that comes from? Because if you talk about hardworking baseball player, I get maybe Joey Votto is the next guy on that list of hardworking and smarts, baseball smarts. But Pete's the guy that brings that work ethic, that Cincinnati blue collar, nose to the grindstone kind of attitude.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's embedded within him. I think it was. I mean, you read a bunch of the books with his life story, and what it was like growing up on the west side of Cincinnati, his relationship with his father, the way he just needed to prove everything all the time. I think it's culturally part of him. I also think, he played on his height, his most famous run, he was surrounded by some great players. So I think that's probably part of the fuel too. Just the lineup that he was in every single day, being in the grade 8 is a huge deal in and of itself. But yeah, I think, that is somewhat what his identity became over time. And I think that effort that lasted, way beyond the shelf life of any normal human to play Major League Baseball as long as he did, to create records that are very likely unbreakable. A lot of that is rooted in one thing, and it is that fire, that will to compete and win.
You do this to me every time we talk, John. My next question is 4,256 unbreakable? That's literally the next question on my list here. The plate appearances, the games played, the hits record. I don't see how, as modern baseball is constructed now, I don't see how any of those records are ever broken.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think that's the asterisk to it, right? As baseball's currently constructed. So we can't know or envision what rule changes, augmentation to the ball itself, to rules of pitching could come in some way between now and hopefully this game is with us for thousands of years. Over that span of time, could the game morph in some way where hits become more plentiful, where maybe they play more games, where sure, yeah. In the same way that, the Babe Ruth home run record, as it was played then, as the ball was constructed then, as athletes existed then, probably was unbreakable, but things change. In the near future, in our lifetime, I don't see how it goes down.
All right, John, I'm going to let you get out of here, but before you go, I know most of Reds country probably already knows, but you do not have a true off season. You never sit still. So I know folks enjoy listening to you, and where can we find you on all of your other stuff this off season if they need their John Sadak fix?
Well, I think there are support groups for that. It's pretty much my mom, but I'll be in college football mode for most of the fall. So I'll do Oregon State, Nevada on CBS Sports Network. Weekend this coming Saturday, so whatever the second weekend of October is. It'll be on a Saturday night. I'll be in Nevada again that next week. It'll be a mishmash of some Mountain West and MAC. I'll have about a half dozen games with CBS on TV. I'll do several more NFL on radio. I'll do the Cowboy-Giant game on Thanksgiving. Doing Bengals-Browns Thursday night in December, but that won't air in Cincinnati because it's blacked out due to the local rights. Dan Horde, Coffin Nails will do a great job the Cincinnati market. And then I'll do Army Navy on radio, and then some books. But that schedule isn't out yet. I'll probably know in the next 2 weeks, at least through December. But it'll be kind of a mishmash. It'll be most weekends I'll be somewhere, and I'll usually put it out on Twitter. So if you and my mom want to join, then you're welcome to do so.
And you can follow John on Twitter X at John Sadak. John, thanks so much for being here. I always learn so much when I talk with you. And, as always, I just want to thank you for being such a friend to the show and a friend to me personally, always, giving me good advice and steering me in the right directions. I really appreciate you.
Thank you so much for checking out our conversation with John Sadak here on today's Locked On Reds podcast. If this is your first time, make sure that you subscribe to the podcast here on YouTube or over on your favorite podcasting app. You can take us with you anywhere, by the way. If you can't watch us on YouTube, you're driving or something like that where you can't watch a YouTube video, we are on your favorite podcasting app, so make sure you subscribe there. Today, coming up on the next podcast, we will be breaking down, reacting to, and really diving into the comments made by Terry Francona and by Reds management as they introduce him Monday morning on Terry Francona's introductory press conference. That will be the next Locked On Reds podcast. Make sure you join us on that one. And thanks for making us your first listen every single day. For your second listen, check out Locked On MLB. Sully's got you covered all throughout the playoffs. He even had a great reaction episode whenever the Reds hired Terry Francona. Sully was a notable Red Sox fan growing up, so he's got a little bit of understanding of what Terry Francona brings to the Reds. So check out Locked On MLB. Got a link in the description of today's episode, so you don't have to go searching for it. So go click on that right now and check it out, because we appreciate you. We're all part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day, and you know that you can trust us to be Locked On Reds every single day.